freedom requires the rule of law and justice. A very good evening and welcome to Face the Nation. We've been providing quite a lot of airtime to discuss Sri Lanka's legal system, Sri Lanka's legal framework, the rule of law, because this goes down to the core of our very existence. Your standard of life, your quality of life, the freedoms that you enjoy, the opportunities that you get will all be decided on how the legal system in Sri Lanka functions, on how the rule of law is respected, and that will finally decide the basis of the fabric of our society, not only here in Sri Lanka, but across the world as well. And today we've got, of course, at this very turbulent time here in Sri Lanka, we're right on the heels of an economic crisis, still reeling out of it, trying to make our way out, and heading into an election season. To discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us today, of course, an expert panel, starting off with Dr. Pakiasothy Saranamutha. He is the Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Thank you very much, Dr. Saranamutha, for joining us on our program today. We've also got with us Dr. Jehan Pereira. He is the Executive Director of the National Peace Council. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us on our program today. Also, not forgetting President's Counsel Kaushalya Navaratna. He is none other than the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on our program today. And we've also got Professor Sampath Punchiheva, the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Colombo. Thank you very much, sir, for also joining us on our program today. So let's get right into the discussion. My first question goes to Dr. Pakiasothy Saranamutha, Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. We've been speaking a lot about fundamental rights, the rule of law, how prevalent is justice here in Sri Lanka. But these matters were not of this much of concern to the general public, say, for example, in 2009. When the war was ongoing, when we were constantly under emergency regulations promulgated by the President. But as time went on, we saw incidents like the Ratupaswala incident, then the 2012 shooting at the Valikada prison complex, and these really woke up the people, and we saw the pinnacle of it at the Aragalaya back in 2022. So my question to you is, Dr. Saranamutha, as far as fundamental rights and the rule of law in Sri Lanka is concerned, right now, as at 2024, where do we really stand?
Well, certainly we are very much on the defensive, on the downward slide, given the legislation that has been proposed and given what happens. I mean, to begin with, we have an acting Inspector General of Police who has been declared responsible for torture by the highest court of the land. Surely that is untenable to talk about an edifice, an architecture of the rule of law, if at the top of it is someone who is responsible for torture according to the highest court of the land. Now, in addition to that, of course, we've had a number of laws that have been proposed and indeed supposedly passed, because with regard to the online security bill, we have no idea what the bill is as yet, which in substance are absolutely deplorable and fundamentally threatening of the basic freedoms that you have in a functioning democracy. But what is worse than that, or equally bad, is the process by which the laws are made. Because it's not the question of the ends justify the means, it is also about the means. I mean, look at what happened with regard to the online security safety bill. You know, what came to Parliament did not have the amendments that were proposed by the Supreme Court in its determination. It's passed, and then the government says, we will then add those. We go to court quite often and challenge the government on the constitutionality of legislation. So we go on a bill that is presented. But if that's not the real bill, if the Attorney General suddenly appears in the Supreme Court and says, no, I will make this amendment and that amendment, when do we get a chance to actually look at the proper bill? There is no post-enactment review in Sri Lanka. No post-enactment judicial review. So we, the citizens for whom the law is being made, are powerless in such a situation. So the court does its work, but the AG and then the Speaker, I mean, how can he certify a bill which does not have the amendments that the Supreme Court says ought to be in there? And the 225 members of Parliament, do they read the bill? I mean, it's a travesty. I mean, you know, I had at least 2 or 3 members of Parliament who phoned me up and asked me, you know, what should I say in Parliament with regard to this? They do constitutional amendments and they don't have a clue of what the substance
Did they comply with your advice, though?
I didn't even bother to check. I honestly, because the way laws are made and the laws that are made are both fundamentally flawed, and that's why we need a new constitutional process which changes all of this. Because, you know, we may not be a substantive democracy, but we might call ourselves a fundamentally flawed but yet formal democracy, but that's also going when you can't follow these proper procedures.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakisoti Saranamuthu. We will get back to, of course, the broad discussions when we open up the floor for questions from our journalists. I now move my attention to Professor Sampath Punchiheva, the Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo. Professor, now Dr. Pakisoti said that certain amendments that were in the special determination of the Supreme Court with regard to the Online Safety Bill at the time, now the Online Safety Act, were not included. Now, of course, you being an academic and, of course, the Dean of the Colombo University would be able to shed some light on this, because there is no consensus on the basic fact as to whether or not these amendments were actually included or not. Because for all the general public knows, there were statements from the opposition saying that these weren't included, and that drive was, of course, led by President's Counsel M.A. Sumanthiran. He has also gone and challenged this matter in the Supreme Court. Then we had the Minister of Justice saying, no, we have done everything correctly. We had the Speaker of Parliament saying, I consulted with the Attorney General, and the Attorney General gave the nod and said that all amendments have been included. Then we get the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka writing a detailed statement on which amendments have not been made and bringing it to the attention of the Speaker of Parliament. And then we have the Attorney General writing on behalf of the Speaker to the Human Rights Commission saying that no, this is wrong. We have amended everything. Everything is as it should be. So to a layman sitting and maybe watching this program at this moment, what really is the truth here? Have these amendments been included or not? Who do we believe here?
Thank you very much for this initiating this discourse in Sri Lanka, which is very pertinent, and also in having invited the best expert who can speak about this. So from a very academic standpoint, I would like to respond to your queries, rather discussion points. That what I see is in Sri Lanka, the lawmaking process is not that great that we can be happy about.
When you say it's not that great, is that an understatement, or is it fundamentally flawed? I think that's what Dr. Pakisoti
I would not go to that end, but I would first enlighten the audience that in a country like Sri Lanka, we need to legislations must be enacted, of course, in response to the needs. However, what I understand is the opportunity to bring in deep reaching and very sound piece of legislation has been rather hindered, rather roadblocked in my estimation. If I say something more on this, now when we compared with the experience, jurisprudence from other countries, what I understand is that the lawmaking process needs a bit more informed by research. Research, because research-driven policy can stand any kind of challenges. Now in Sri Lanka, what I see is the legislation is drafted without foreseeing the needs and also without a proper assessment of the needs of the society. So that has led us to different, of course, very unfortunate situation. As you rightly pointed out, even a very little window to question that lawmaking process is, I feel, disappearing. So that is something not a healthy development in the country. But at the same time, I would say, when a legislation is introduced, the expert in the field should be consulted. And we have to have a need-based assessment and academic research in other countries. Just see how the lawmaking process, and first of all, there will be research to carry out. Research will be carried out to understand the need of the society, need of the country. But it is no exception in Sri Lanka. I think that has to be taken very seriously in a country like Sri Lanka. And one other thing I would like to say, whatever the legislation is introduced in Sri Lanka, we might have to look at the outside world. Because some countries have more experience. Just see some more sophisticated jurisdictions in the world. Have they done so? And we can learn many lessons from comparative research. I would say, I'm not for a moment suggesting that we should import foreign alien piece of legislation. Rather, my point is, some countries have lived with the experience of that particular legislation. And in order to draft proper balance and long-lasting piece of legislation, one has to take cognizance of the development in other countries. In this regard, I think the UK experience, we have legislative heritage from the common law heritage, and we got to look at the experience. And my proposition is, a country like us should introduce new legislation or reform existing legislation only after assessing the needs and also proper research to be conducted in order to ascertain the proper legal landscape to bring in a new legislation.
Thank you very much, Professor Punchiheva. Well, of course, there might be an assessment of the needs being carried out when these legislation are being passed, but the needs of whom? I think that is also a fundamental question. We'll get into that discussion when we open up the floor for questions from the journalist. Moving on, we've got Dr. Jehan Pereira, the Executive Director of the National Peace Council. On the fundamental rights situation in Sri Lanka at the moment, of course, you've raised concerns regarding what is happening in Sri Lanka time and time again when you appear on our programs and, of course, on other platforms as well. But tell me, Dr. Pereira, is the situation as bleak as Dr. Pakisothi Saravanamuthu painted it to be, or is there a glimmer of hope?
Well, I would say that it is still not as bleak, so bleak, because the fact that he could say it at all. I mean, I was actually admiring him for saying what he said. Those are difficult things, especially when referring to individuals in power. And he did that. So that means he has still got, we have still got some confidence that we can speak freely. But of course, I also am aware that not all of us have this type of protection. And we have seen what has happened to other people.
Are you saying that Dr. Saravanamuthu has some special privilege that many Sri Lankans are not accorded?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very well-known person and extremely well-educated, well-connected.
Well, that didn't help me when I got my death threats and all of that.
That's right. Yeah. So, but I think we are, as he said, we are on the downslide. And that's very unfortunate. Actually, we thought 2 years ago that that we would be making, because things had got so bad in our country at that time. And when the new president came, I mean, there was a hope that things would improve. But, well, they improved in the sense of a certain stability that was brought, but it has come at a very high cost. The high cost being that certain levels, certain groups in society have had to pay the price, a disproportionate price. The larger groups in society have paid a disproportionate price for the stability that benefits a smaller group. So I think that is something that we need to be conscious of and work to change. And I also see that in the laws that are being now drafted, the anti-terrorism law, I mean, in a way, we should ask, do we need this law? The PTA was brought at a time when the country was sliding into terrorism. There was terrorism, of course, due to certain unaddressed root causes. People don't just become terrorists, and people don't just support terrorists. And when people do support terrorists, it means that maybe those people are not terrorists. So, but the PTA was brought at that time. Now that era is over. 15 years it has been over. It is true that there was a massive act of terrorism, the Easter bombing. But I don't think that having terrorism laws helped there, because from all that we know, there was some sort of
conspiracy.
Yeah, conspiracy, connivance. The system broke down. System was didn't function because those in positions of power, as our Supreme Court has said, did not discharge their duties. It didn't have to do with this harshness of the law or the laxity of the law in that case. So, but now why are we coming up with this Anti-Terrorism Act, which is at least as bad, or if not worse, in terms of restricting rights and in terms of giving arbitrary powers to the security forces, to the politicians in charge? Not necessary. And then comes, of course, the online safety bill. And then we are concerned, I as a civil society person, I'm very concerned about this new NGO law that's being drafted. And it's being drafted ostensibly to make Sri Lanka comply with anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist laws. I mean, are the NGOs doing the money laundering, or are some other groups doing the money laundering?
I think that's definitely a question that we could get into.
So I mean, at the moment we have quite a liberal NGO framework. We are happy about it. It's better than in our neighboring countries. But as Dr. Saranamuthu says, we are on the downward, and I'm very worried that the freedoms we now have to present alternative views, to present constructive critics of what is going on in society, what our political leaders are doing, might be taken away from us. And we'll be made vulnerable to commissars, to government commissars who will decide that we have crossed the line or crossed certain lines.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council. Finally, we've got for the opening statement, President's Counsel Kaushalya Navaratna, the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. President's Counsel Navaratna, now we know that the Bar Association of Sri Lanka really came to the fore, came to the rescue of the people at the time they needed it most, especially during the protests that ensued in 2022. And even before that, we saw the legal fraternity really coming together to represent the general public, to fight on behalf of their rights. We saw courthouses full of lawyers representing the general public of Sri Lanka pro bono because of their own conscience. So the Bar Association of Sri Lanka has been elevated to this position of guardian of the rule of law and justice in society. So I think I can get a proper answer from you to this question. I also pose this question to Professor Punchiheva. Same question to you. Now, there are multiple views being expressed regarding the Online Safety Act. Like I said before, we have the Human Rights Commission saying one thing, the Attorney General Department siding with the Speaker, and the Minister of Justice saying that this is okay. Then we have the opposition saying that no, it's not okay. Now it has been challenged in the Supreme Court. The matter has still not been supported. So where does the Bar Association stand in all of this? Because the general public, of course, cannot understand what is happening here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shalan, for inviting me to come and be a part of this very important discussion. And the question what was posed to me is ultra important as far as the freedom of the people are concerned, of the citizens of our country are concerned. The Bar Association, as you correctly, as you were heard to say, always we take the right side and we take the side of the people, and we being the members of the legal fraternity, we can really read what's going to happen, what will come to us. And the time, of course, the time that you mentioned, a few minutes ago, that in 2022, the uprising of the people, there were good reason for the people to raise their voice and to get together and to protest against the governors due to the hardships and the difficulties and the manner in which the people who were in power were trying to suppress the voice of the people. And as Dr. Pakiswati was heard to say, or rather at least Dr. Jahan, and the governors are not very comfortable to, basically take, or rather at least to hear the dissent. They always try their level best to suppress the dissent and their opinions and then to take undue advantage. Those are areas where normally the professionals and the politicians don't, meet eye to eye. As far as the Bar Association is now concerned, and we are fighting with this cause, and it is our, I always say, undeniable duty that, or rather, the public trust that has been entrusted upon the legal fraternity and the Bar Association to take this cause forward. That is what we are fighting for. And then getting back to your point, the point when it came to the ATA and the Online Safety Bill, and those are the Bar Association took charge. At least we challenged these bills because when we studied the provisions that what were proposed in the original the draft bills, we knew it's of course it can be kind of abused to suppress the opinion of the people, the freedom of the citizens of the country. That is one of the reasons as to why we, being the Bar Association, we challenged these bills in the Supreme Court. And not only the constitutionality, because I think a few minutes ago we talked about, when a bill is challenged, what is the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court? Can they just go beyond the powers that has been conferred in terms of the Constitution to look into the various other aspects? So they will look into the legality, the constitutionality of the bill, but of course the bill might be constitutional, but of course the repercussions and the impact of the provision could be more on the society. So that is what has happened in the past. That is why we always we caution the general public, as well as we just get the professionals to rally around and then to basically fight against this. And then as far as your question is concerned, the politicians and this we challenge these two bills in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has expressed their opinion. And with regard to certain the provisions in the bill, the Supreme Court has expressed the opinion it could be passed with simple majority. Since they have found that some of those provisions are this challenge or obnoxious to the existing provisions of the articles of the Constitution, they had said, okay, you pass it with 2/3 majority. And then not only that, in certain provisions you must get the mandate of the people, go for a referendum. So therefore the Supreme Court has expressed the opinion, you have to either amend it, if you want to have it passed in the Parliament in the manner which it is proposed, you have to basically follow the procedure what is being mentioned in the opinion itself. But of course, it is very disheartening. Now we find, right or wrongly, we are yet to see, who's saying the right thing or the wrong thing, or which is right, which is wrong. Now it is challenged the Supreme Court on the alleged basis that the procedure, or at least the opinion, what has not been expressed by the apex court in the country, while exercising the constitutional jurisdiction, what has been conferred on the apex court in terms of constitution, has not been complied, or at least being ignored by the 225 the so-called public representatives in the parliament. So which is not a very healthy situation as far as the democracy of our country is concerned. So therefore it is quite alarming, and certainly the Bar Association will take a decision, because I am yet to go before the Executive Committee, and we will take a decision very soon. That is one matter where we just can't just sleep over or rather ignore, and it is a matter that will have to be taken up very seriously. And none other than a member of the Bar, now who's a member of the Parliament, has now challenged this process what was adopted by the Parliament, and certainly Bar Association will take a very proactive role after studying the process what has been.
So would I be correct in saying that the Bar Association is actively looking at intervening in the petition that was filed by President's Counsel M.A. Sumantiran?
Of course, that certainly that is a must. That's why I say there are certain duties which we just can't ignore. And this is one of such situation, because this is a question of your freedom, my freedom, and the freedom of the future generation. So it is not something which can be ignored for the sake of the nation. So that is something which we will take it very seriously, and that is something which certainly I will go before the Executive Committee, get their permission, and necessary papers will be filed, because and as Dr. Pakasoti and Jahan and my friend was heard to say, we don't have this post-enactment the review system in our country. This is the whole process, and we are agitating. We were trying to have this legislation passed and to have this proper system put in place. But it is something not to the liking of the people who are in power. So therefore they always try to just ignore it. And the lack of consultative process which he just mentioned, that is also extra important, ultra important rather. I would say that rather than sometimes we have this constitutionally or a legally accepted independent institution set up, like the Law Commission. Now the laws are being drafted like in office of A, B, C and D, and A appoints a committee, a number of people at his free will, and get them to draft some legislation. Next time the bill is placed before the Parliament. Where are these consultative process that are to be adopted, that which must be adopted? That is where these things are going wrong. That is why we are so grateful to all these the civil society activists and the professionals who are raising the voice, and especially the media is playing a very pivotal role, and that is something which is very important looking at the progress and the future of our country.
Thank you very much, President's Counsel Kaushal Navaratna, President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. The floor is now open to questions from our journalists. On my right, we have Niresh Eliyathambi, and on my left, Nadeem Majid. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Shalan. Professor Punchi, I would actually like to start with you. I have we've had these discussions around law over a very long period of time, and over the years, something that has come to mind is like we seem to be seeing increasingly nonsensical legislation being brought in at Parliament. It seems that it would appear on the surface, at least, that this is a trend. Now, Dr. Karunamuthu says that the process of lawmaking itself and even the laws that are made are fundamentally flawed. And when you look at this trend, not just with the Online Safety Act, I mean, you go back 2017 Provincial Council Elections Amendment Act, where a 3-page bill turns into a 60-page act. And you think, is there a crisis in legal education in the country itself? Because, I mean, I know that there's a popular sort of opinion amongst the public that parliamentarians lack educational qualifications, but there are many lawyers in Parliament. And I mean, even to people who knew that these are lawyers who are in Parliament, when you listen to their speeches during the debate on the Online Safety Act, it was evident that they didn't understand it either. So is there a question? Is there a crisis in legal education in the country. Is that why we're seeing this trend?
I think you posed the question to that. Perfect.
I mean, it's the Dean of the Faculty of Law. Right?
Thank you, but of course I'm right now. I would like to respond with some caveat because I think you are right, because the process is made in such a way in this country, even the challenges are not being permitted. Now the question that I think it's pertinent question, now you asked about the online safety bill.
Yes,
that has
one
been
example.
Passed. That has been passed, and you were talking about the 225 members, parliamentarians, and sometimes they are not aware fully on the content of the document. That's of course.
Yeah, but at the same time, what I was saying was, there's of the 225, I think there's about 15 who are attorneys at law.
True, that's true, but
Probably, maybe more.
Maybe more.
Maybe more,
No,
I think, who
there
are attorneys
about,
at law.
There are about 30,
so then
there are about 36 or 37
okay.
members.
So 15 off the
And
top of
among
my
them,
head that I
quite-
can
quite a
name.
number of President's
but
Council
okay,
also.
36 in total. But
5.
So my question is, now you have 36 lawyers, right, in Parliament. And when listening to the debate on the Online Safety Act, my thing is, do they not understand what they're talking about? And it seemed that way. So then I was wondering, is legal education of sufficient quality in Sri Lanka? Which is why I'm posing this question to you as the Dean of the Faculty of Law.
That's true. Thank you for that question. I think we have to look at it from a very balanced perspective. I think there's nothing wrong with the legal education. Perhaps it is something that we have to think about the entire societal fabric, not only the legal education, and not even one institution to be blamed. Now, if I also argue on this point, I think not only the parliamentarians, not only the legal education system, but what about the policymakers? Because now there should be a clear policy on certain matters. Now, just take for example the online safety bill. So what is the policy? The policy, there is no clear policy guidelines up until the last reading of the document in the parliament. Once it is signed into, once it is breathed life into, then we talk about it. But up until that point, there are changes. There are changes, and we should trust the policymakers also take very serious consideration.
But the thing is, Professor Puncheva, I mean, if you're looking at policy makers, then you have like subject experts as well. So on the Online Safety Act, even back in, I believe in October when it was first sort of gazetted, even as back then, there were industry experts who you could, I guess, qualify as policymakers to a certain level, who were saying, look, this is highly problematic. These are the reasons why it is highly problematic. And in the 5 months in between October, none of the policymakers' recommendations were taken on board. The ruling party or the ruling parties, persons who are in government right now, decided to just go ahead with what they had come up with already. And barring a few amendments that may or may not have been made, we'll find out when the Supreme Court issues its determination on the most recent challenge. But so in that situation, like, it seems to me like you would have to agree with Dr. Sarnamotu that, because it's not just, this is one example, is the Online Safety Act. If you go back, I mean, you don't have to go that far back. Within the last 10 years, you can see legislation that has come up that is fundamentally flawed.
That's, of course, to a certain extent, I would agree with Nadeem. But Nadeem, also we have to consider the fact that the legislation are drafted hastily in Sri Lanka. And as at the very outset I mentioned to this forum that the laws are drafted, laws are reformed without giving due consideration to proper assessment of the need. And of course, legal research. That is the aspect that I consider not present in the Sri Lankan legal landscape.
So what you're saying is, if I could summarize that in a nutshell, could I say then that, look, there's no problem with legal education in Sri Lanka, with the quality of legal education in Sri Lanka. The problem is that those in power are basically ignoring legal academia.
So if there's a problem with the legal education, then that problem existed some time ago. Now, for example, we have lived in this country 76 years since independence. So we have to also look at it in hindsight.
Mr. Navaratna, as the president of the Bar Association, I'll pose the same question to you as well, because the Bar Association does have say and sway over legal education.
Thank you very much for posing that question directly to me as well. Because when it comes to the legal education, I must say, we being the members of the bar and how shall I say, the leaders of the legal profession, we are agitating that there must be some changes that must be introduced to our legal education system. And not only the number of, you can see, I think Shalan would, I think he's quite aware of it, being an active member of the legal profession. And we always agitate for several years. We appointed several subcommittees, debated, and in fact, his senior, Mr. Gunawardana, is one of my main a member, and who took over certain committees, took the trouble of running around the country, consulting all the stakeholders, the private sector, and because we have a system, it does not cater to the present day demands in our country. So that has always been a question. That is why the Bar Association has made several proposals to the government, to the Council of Legal Education. Of course, one of the main things that was proposed to basically give the legal education in English, allow students to brush up their English language, because that is the future in our country, whether you like it or not. If you go to the other jurisdictions, I would say the quality of their legal education is something which you will be surprised to take note. But when you have a sort of a comparison between our education and their education, we find there are lots of areas which need to be addressed and it needs to be improved. So getting back to the second limb of your question, perhaps when it is true, there are about 35 odd members of the legal profession now in the parliament, and if I may be a bit sarcastic on this matter, and they are not the members, they are as members of the legal profession, they are politicians. Whether if I'm a professional, if I'm to express my opinion, if I'm to debate over a bill or whatever matter, and I must express my opinion as a professional, not as a politician. Now what happens in Sri Lanka? Your opinion will depend on the political party and the ideology of your political inclination. Based on that, you express your opinion. That is what is happening.
But still, Ms. Navaratna, even if you're speaking with a political slant, there should be some application of knowledge, of learning. So, for example, if I'm a Marxist economist who has studied economic theories, if I were in parliament, hypothetically, if I were in parliament, and if I was advocating for a certain Marxist economic policy, I would draw on my knowledge, my thesis, or whatever it is that I've done to him. My question here is, with this debate on the Online Safety Act in Parliament, with the lawyers, you mentioned 35, I only observed around a handful, about 14 or 15. Looking at their speeches in Parliament, I couldn't sense any application of legal knowledge into the debate.
I'm in agreement with you. I'm with you because that is something which is baffling me as well. Why can't they really understand the adverse consequences of these bills, these provisions, when it becomes the law? And obviously, if you are an expert, obviously, it goes without saying that you have to have a proper understanding of the act what you do. And here they just, depending on the party that you represent, you raise your hand and vote for or against. And that is why now for instance, we have a system in our parliamentary system where you can appoint people who are not contest, stand for elections. So
The national list.
Now for what purpose that is being used to now? The people who lost the elections, or the elderly people who can't basically run around and nurse their electorate, and the people who just fund their election campaigns, they are the people who are on the national list. Why this nationalist concept is introduced to the system, I think, Doctor, you get a small smile to his face. Why? There are good reasons. The legislations, when it is drafted, especially the constitutions, it is not for fun. These things are introduced into our legal system. It is with a good cause to get proper academics into the country. Why? It is the place where you pass legislations, you govern the country, you take policy decisions. You can see now, you said some people do not know how these bills were passed, and some members of the parliament did not have proper understanding of what they did, what they just spoke of. But can you remember, a few years ago, there was a president in this country, when it came to the signing of certain agreements, bilateral agreement with some of the countries, he said, it was explained to me in Sinhala. And what was tabled in the parliament is slightly different. Was to be signed, the document which was to be signed by both countries is either different from what was tabled in the parliament. And he was heard to say in public, saying, what was explained to me, and handed over a copy which was in Sinhala, and of course I was happy with that. And that was the low level to which this country has gone down to. So you have to be basically mindful of that fact. That is why people like you and I have this duty to basically educate our society, the voters. This is the year 2024, and I say it's an election year. Hopefully that they have to have elections, and therefore that people must use their the brains when they just put their cross.
President Council Navaratna, since we're on the subject of educating the general public on their rights, on the law, and you said it's the undeniable duty of the Bar Association and of the legal profession to educate the general public. When you say the general public, now of course we'll have a group of people watching the show right now who would have been following the politics in Sri Lanka and would have some understanding of what the law is here in Sri Lanka. But then we need to take a look at the society as a whole outside of the suburbs of Colombo and the Colombo city as a whole. And when you move out of Colombo, you don't see any understanding, even the most basic understanding of the law, even when it comes to a simple stop and search. The fact that a policeman needs to have reasonable suspicion, the fact that a policeman cannot just arrest you for whatever reason he thinks right, take you, go assault you, hypothetically, put you in a cage, and then go drop you off at home, and they feel helpless. So is there a need at all, and then is there any steps being taken by the Bar Association or any other leading legal body here in Sri Lanka to at least try and incorporate some legal education into the school curriculum here in Sri Lanka? Because there is a presumption that everybody in Sri Lanka knows the law. That is the presumption. As much as you are presumed innocent until proven guilty, you are also presumed to always know the law. But what if this presumption is just a blatant fallacy?
Yeah, thank you very much for asking that question as well, Shalan. And the Bar Association, having understood and realized the importance of, basically educating the general public, especially with regard to their basic rights. And we made many representations over the years. Therefore, presently, the Minister of Education agreed, pro forma to incorporate legal education into their curriculum. Of course, that will start perhaps somewhere next year, 2025, if I'm not mistaken. And now the steps are being taken. Not only that, the Bar Association, this is our 50th year, as we are well aware. So we have, basically launched a program to go to all 9 provinces and the 25 districts and to have legal education, the clinics for the benefit of the general public. I think that is one of the main, basically an act or an activity that we are going to, basically do during, this year 2024. And plus, not only that, we have realized the Triforces and the police, and there are so many allegations that are being made against them, and why they are just, violate, they always violate the rights and the freedom of movement of the people. People are being taken into custody, and they are being arrested, and there is this, program, goes under the name of Yuktiya, and you always, like, we are just, closely monitoring this, not that we have just, don't do anything on that. Steps are being taken even to, challenge where it is needed. And as far as the strikers and the police, those personals are, concerned, we are conducting programs for the benefit of these members, and not only that, even for the government servants. Now we are conducting programs all around the country, and I think next month we are going down to Tisamaharama, and where the government officials, the divisional secretaries, and few other government officials, they are supposed to come and participate these programs. So, and these programs we will continue right throughout the year for the benefit of the membership.
Dr. Saramuthu, just on this question of this legislation, because you said earlier, this process is fundamentally flawed. Going beyond the process itself, there's a saying that you must never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. So I want to ask you, when you say fundamentally flawed, given your long years of work in this area, doing public advocacy on legislation as well, do you think it's primarily malice or stupidity?
Well, it could well be a combination of the two. Because, I think at the end of the day, you look at it, the executive is to make the law, implement the law. The legislature is to make it, and the judiciary is to interpret it. So when we get a bad law, where is it originating from? It's originating from the executive. And we know that since 1978 at least, the executive is one individual. Lawmaking is political. If that individual says, I want an amendment which removes the checks and balances that I have on my office, it'll happen within a week, as it has. So, I think if you look at the structure of power, you have to look at the abolition of the executive presidency as well. Because those bureaucrats, if they challenge their ministers, and if the minister brings it up in cabinet, he knows that he might lose his job.
As has happened to many.
As has happened to many. So it is the dispersion of power within the executive that we need to look at. No doubt, there are problems with regard to legal education and all of that, but this is what is fundamental. Because you can give the best legal education to a ministry secretary or whoever, but if he is scared to open his mouth because he knows he will lose his job, or, as it might well be, all the perks and all the corrupt deals that he has made will be lost and his lifestyle will be ruined, why would he do it? And who is appointing him? Who is appointing him? In 2005, we were supposed to have, 350,000 or something in the public service. Now we have 1.6 million. Who's responsible for that? So they are, so as I said, you can have the best legal education, but what we need to get into the people is that they are suffering. They have to challenge. They have to speak up. Not end up talking about it in their private conversations and waiting for the next election, if it is going to happen, to do whatever they need to. You see, a vibrant democracy requires vigilance, eternal vigilance. You can't, I've said this so many times on your programs, our democracy is every 5 years, if we are lucky, we go and buy a ticket to a play and we sit in the audience and watch it. Then we go home and criticize it. We can't be the audience. We have to be stakeholders.
If the play is really bad, you have to heckle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is our life.
But then what's the point if you heckle and there's nothing that you can really do about it? We don't have the right to recall.
So that is why we had the example of the Aragalaya. All right, what did the Aragalaya do? They got the Rajapaksas out of government. They didn't get them out of politics. They spoke about system change, but not in sufficient detail. So we've got that lesson. Next time, if it's going to happen, it ought to happen a lot better. Ought to happen a lot better, otherwise we'll do.
Dr. Saramuthu, let's look at the process of lawmaking, which is clearly far too important to be left to the legislature. What should the process be And who should be involved?
Well, we used to have a situation where we produced white papers and green papers and all of that. That's gone. But what is fundamental is that who is the law being made for? We must have consultation with the stakeholders. I mean, today they're talking about, amongst other things, they're talking about what truth, reconciliation, and justice and unity. Now, who have they talked to? They've come and talked to certain civil society organizations, and we've said, for heaven's sake, go to Jaffna, to Batticaloa, to where these families of the victims are, and ask them, talk to them. I was the secretary of a consultation task force in 2016. We went all over the country. We produced a 900-page report where we talked to people. So, you need to have that consultative process before you bring the law. You can't bring the law and then have the consultative process because we don't have any post-enactment review, judicial review of legislation.
Dr. Jehan, do you think after everything that has happened here in Sri Lanka now, I think Dr. Pakisothi quite rightly said that we can't just be spectators, we need to be stakeholders, we need to be involved. But for the general public to be involved, there needs to be a certain opening, a certain level of opportunity afforded to them. Accessibility afforded to them by the government or accorded to them as part of the social contract continuing throughout that 5 years. Do you think that everything that has happened during the past few years with the Aragalaya and the movement that is now coming up would persuade future governments to look more at making people, the general public of Sri Lanka, stakeholders and, well, consulting them, like Dr. Pakisothi just said? Do you think the governments will be persuaded to do this in the future?
Well, they should be.
But would they be?
Yeah, they should be. I mean, yeah, for that, I think one thing, there needs to be a change.
A change in the people. What do you mean when you say change? It's a very broad word.
Change in those who are in charge, change in those who are governing, and
change in the people who are governing.
The change in the people who are governing, and I think that there probably is a change in the people who are governed, and that's why there is a lot of. I think there is a desire for elections, and. I mean, if public opinion polls are any indication, the anti-government
rhetoric
vote, I mean the poll, is much higher than for the government candidates. So that itself suggests that there is a desire for change on the part of the people. They want, and sometimes the individuals have to change also. The individuals have to be changed.
And Dr. Perry, when you say change, like from a electoral focus, from a, like looking at it through the lens of elections, realistically, let's say if there is a general election first, which is probably unlikely, but those anti-government forces that you're talking about, let's say the Samagijana Balawegaya, the NPP, the TNA, even if they come into power, it's going to be a lot of the same faces that are still in parliament. You might have 50 or 60 new faces who may be coming from previous parliaments, but it's going to be a lot of the same faces. So it hasn't really changed, has it?
And also
because those faces aren't changed.
Processes remain the same. So we need to talk about what the new processes need to be, such as post-enactment judicial review, and who's going to bring those in. Otherwise, you will find a new.
Feel free to chime in, Sarah. I can see you're aching to chime in.
No, you see, I mean, it's not the government allowing you access. It's you, the people, who are suffering.
You take access.
You have to take access. And that was what the Aragalaya was all about. You have to be the change that you want. Otherwise it's not going to happen. Because once they get in there, those 225 constitute a club. No one else has membership to it.
So what is needed is that the people going to the streets, I mean, it's not part of the legal system to change things. They can only change things.
I mean,
if
it is part of the legal system in the constitutional recognition of your right to dissent. right?
No, but if it's
To protest.
part of the legal system, because the legal system is decrepit and dysfunctional.
Yes, so no, what I'm saying, the basic way in which we can ensure change in our country is to have elections. And nothing must stand in the way of those elections.
Okay.
Because it would be too high a price to pay not to have elections. But elections are what's going to change those who rule us. And it is in that change, and hopefully the people will vote for those who are able to convince them that they are thinking not only of their own interests, of their own community's interests, but of the interests of the whole.
But Dr.
of the
Perez,
whole
let me
country.
put it this, I think I kind of understand what you're saying. Like, okay, you'll see that change in a short term, but if you look at it from a lot, like you broaden and you look at it of the history of electoral politics in the country, a broader sort of perspective, and then you talk about change and you realize that no, I mean this sort of merry-go-round, this keeps going. You'll see a few faces drop off, a few faces added on over time, but more or less the system itself, the establishment itself has continued unabated, unhindered. We spoke about change in 2015. There was appetite for change, and people voted thinking that Yahapalnya will come in. And then you spoke about obstacles to elections. Yahapalnya promptly set about postponing elections, the local councils until 2018, and then the provincial council elections have not been held since 2013, almost over 10 years now, right? So I think the last one was the Northern Provincial Council election, 2013. So you can see that the pieces on the chessboard, I mean, it's the same chessboard. You're switching between sort of black and white, but the pieces are the same. Their characteristics fundamentally appear to be the same as well. So what I understand what you're saying from a short-term perspective. Okay, there'll be a change from white to black, but when you look at it overall, you realize, you come to the grim realization that the chessboard has not changed at all.
But you know, if you look at other countries, they also were corrupt.
They're the same problem.
They also had the same problem, but then the ones that emerged out of that did have leaders, special leaders. So we have to try and identify who that special leader will be. I mean, maybe we have not had that great fortune, but I think we have to trust the electoral process, the
I have a feeling
democratic
that
process.
your philosophy of leadership is nature and not nurture, that leaders are born and not made.
No, but I think we put a tremendous amount of emphasis, particularly after the Aragala, but on the youth. How many youth are coming into politics? How about you?
In media. No interest in coming in politics.
But media is also political.
Do you qualify as youth now?
No, but you see, the thing
I
is
don't
this-
qualify as youth anymore. Not
Well,
by any
all right.
definition.
People who are presumably younger than Shahan and myself. Okay. But, you know, so that is the thing, is that you need to have people who feel empowered to get in to make a difference. And I grant you, I mean, people who have tried, and maybe they've tried the wrong methods, but they've been butchered. Savagely butchered. In the last 25 years or 30 years, we've had bloodbaths in this country which have changed things, but
And that could partially be the reason why there is such a dearth in
yeah,
leadership.
quite possible, because always the old men inherit. The young men get killed. Yeah, but hopefully after the Aragalia, maybe things are different. And that's the one thing that the one lesson that we should take from the Aragalia.
And I guess we'll only really know where the chips fall once we have elections.
Yeah, no, and once nominations are called, and you know how many people are going to, you know, form parties and contest and whatever.
Dr. Pakiswati, just before we move into the final closing arguments, I'd like to pose just one question to you now. Since we are in the run-up to an election, in about 6 months, we're going to have to go to the polls and vote. So a lot of things are happening, and the 6 months will probably go by in a flash. There are individuals who are coming out now, throwing their name into the hat of the presidential election, of course, and then there are, of course, people coming around them, supporting them, and all that. Much of the things that we hear is you know, we were not allowed an opportunity to work properly, so please give us an opportunity to work properly. Then we hear, we are ready to change, we are people who can change. So with your years of dealing with politicians in Sri Lanka and other political actors here in Sri Lanka, do you believe that a person who has held one point of view or acted in a certain way for an extended period of time, maybe even extending across decades, because many of our politicians are in that game for decades, do you think that they have the potential, the capacity, or is there a possibility for them to really change the way they claim that they will?
Well, if they are going to be politically relevant, they have to change because they have to take in the new context. I think what we have in this country is that you have some politicians who have good ideas of where to take this country, but have no idea how to implement. Absolutely no idea how to implement anything as far as that's concerned. So it depends then entirely on this whole question of the electorate being sufficiently educated or literate to make sound choices. Now, for example, as we all know, the JVP is said to is on the rise. And the argument of the JVP at the end of the day is anti-corruption, and you've given these other two parties for 76 years the power, and they've screwed us up in style. Now, what will the JVP do when it is elected? Do we know?
You mean if it is elected?
If it is elected. Yeah, sure. Do we know? Now, we did the same thing in 2019. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was supposed to be the strong leader who was going to do X, Y, and Z. But oddly enough, in terms of that strong leader, all those policies that the military and the security establishment expected him to do came only after he left. You know, that's the biggest irony of it.
Now, Dr. Jahan, you spoke of political change, but it's not just political change that the people were calling for, it was system change. So, for one glaring example is what we are discussing today, the system by which laws are brought in.
But they're politically constructed.
Yes, but if you simply, like Nadeem said, you change your the chess pieces around, but you end up on the same board, then there's no real system change. How should that be achieved?
I mean, I think system change is actually about constitutional change.
Exactly.
It is very necessary. But first of all, our leaders have to win the confidence of the people. And Dr. Sara mentioned that there are leaders with good vision, good ideas, but they don't implement. And then the thought came to me of what one of my friends living in the East is always telling me, how recently the president went to the East. There's a big problem of land in the East, of grazing land, land that has traditionally been used by the farmers the herders in that area to graze their cattle. But now, in recent times, people from outside have come and are occupying that land. And when the president went, this problem was brought up to him. And then he issued orders, he issued instructions. He said this problem will be solved in a few days, in 3 days or something. But now weeks have gone or months have gone, and what those people find, what the herders, the people who are grazing their cattle find, is that the police are not acting, the courts have made decisions, the decisions of courts are not being taken into account, so it's not being implemented. So we need a system where what the president says is actually implemented on the ground. For that, I think our institutions have to change.
But at the same time, to use your example of the East, we also see in specific areas of the East, going beyond just sort of squatters or people coming and occupying tracts of grazing land. There are very hungry eyes in Colombo and in other parts of the area eyeing the idyllic coastline of the East, looking to sort of push people out. There's sort of land grabs. You can see the language of land grabs and gentrification in the works. I think the problem is probably more than the following the president's orders and the lack of a public interest focus amongst the public administration and also the politicians. The administrators and the politicians.
Unfortunately, Nadeem, I don't think we'd really have time for a broad discussion on that matter. Entirely more political setup might be required to maybe get into that, and also we're running out of time, so we'll move into the closing statements from our panelists. I'd like to start off with Professor Sampath Poonchiheva, the Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo. Much was discussed here today regarding the current situation as far as the rule of law in Sri Lanka is concerned, justice and the fundamental rights of the general public. As at least as a summary of what was discussed here, the understanding of the law among parliamentarians was brought to question. The understanding of the law among the general public of Sri Lanka was called into question, and also the implementation of the law as a result of that lack of understanding has created problems in Sri Lanka. So if you could touch on how we could maybe address these issues, I think that will be very helpful to the general public. Your time starts now.
Yeah, Shalan, thank you very much for putting everything into perspectives. And also very briefly, in the interest of time, I'm in agreement with all the esteemed panelists, and in going forward as a nation, of course, few things we have to take into consideration. First one, the consultative process in making laws should be followed in this country, and we have to always respect democratic values. And as our president of the Bar Association rightly pointed out, the legal education is very important. Why? Because the law operates in the presumption that everybody knows the law. But conduct a survey, and how many of us, of course, the members of the legal fraternity are aware of the law, but what about the average person on the street? Are they adequately aware of? And adding to that, what about the language in the legislation? Can a simple person understand what the law says? It's very complicated language. We have to have paradigm shift in our thinking. Why? We need to draft our laws in a plain language rule, like that has been followed in other countries. See a piece of legislation emanating in the UK or any other countries like Australia, New Zealand. Just see how simple they are, but how complicated are boilerplate language in our legislation. Not forget about an average person,
even
literate, educated person who has not acquainted with legal jargons cannot understand. So we have to go into the very bottom line, go to the average grassroots level, and we need to, and right steps have been taken, of course, by association, and also there will be new curriculum introduced to enlighten the nation on the need of the legal education. And we have to bring this message to the society, and also legal education is a must. It's a must, and good, I'm not seeing everything dark, but I see some positives also, because now the steps have been taken. In future, we can be optimistic of the implementation. But I would say the law-making process should be informed by sound policies, adequate research, and also after proper stakeholder consultation. Consultative process, as our distinguished panelists mentioned, consultative process is a must, because otherwise the laws are made without even consulting the people to whom they will be applied. And also as a nation, of course I would say as a matured democracy of 76 years, we must take these things into consideration. And thank you very much for the opportunity to deliberate and meticulous discussion on this point.
Thank you very much, Professor Punchiheva. I now move my attention to President's Counsel Kaushala Navaratna, the President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. President's Counsel Navaratna, much was discussed about violations of fundamental rights, and we see it more often than we'd like to when we tune into the news, and more often than not, we see proper action not being taken against those who are complicit or to blame for these infractions of fundamental rights. However, there are instances when the long arm of the law works to punish these individuals and to bring them to book. And I believe a recent report was that several police officers who violated the fundamental rights of an individual had to apologize to that individual in court on bended knees. And this is, of course, the brighter side of things. But given the number of fundamental rights violations that are taking place in Sri Lanka, and also the fact that the general public aren't aware of what to do, and sometimes it's the fact that people just don't have enough money or enough education or social stature to really go and consult a lawyer even and get advice on what they should do. You said that the Bar Association should protect the rights of the general public. So for anyone who is facing a violation of fundamental right, if they think that they have been wronged and need to have some sort of justice done to them, how can the Bar Association help? Because, well, the people who are watching right now could even spread this message to anyone who needs it. How can they reach out?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shalan. And it was, of course, when you come to the Bar Association, when it comes to the Bar Association, we have our separate subcommittees that have been established. If there's any violation of not only the fundamental rights, like if you feel that even, there are certain instances where certain policy decisions have been taken by the governors, where we feel that it is not for the benefit of the general public, then there are many occasions where we have challenged those decisions in court of law, and we have been able to secure certain judgments in our favor. In the same breath, if you feel if a citizen is of the view that his rights have been denied, violated, we say in legal jargon has been infringed, as enshrined in our constitution, then we have a system, we have a process well within the process of the Bar Association, where we advise the general public irrespective of their social standings. And there are many instances where the Bar Association has basically chipped in and taken these matters to courts. And at the same time, even today, there were certain general public, certain people who came over to the Bar Association. They sought the assistance of the Bar Association to have certain issues resolved. So not only the main matters like the violation of their fundamental rights or the freedom of speech or any other matter, even their day-to-day the main issues, they come and consult our special committee, that have been approved by the Bar Council to have their matters resolved through the due process of law. So there we have a system, like in case if a person is of the opinion that he needs certain legal advice and he needs certain pro bono, the legal support to take up certain matters before court, certainly the Bar Association will, accept, and we will extend our support, because a lot of people, they think when it comes to lawyers, they're very expensive and they will not render their professional services unless and otherwise their fees are paid, but it is not the case. Even during, as the doctor, of course, he's in many cases in court, but of course you would see when it comes to the public interest litigation, most of the lawyers, I would say, without, of course, there may be one or two exceptions, but most of the senior lawyers, they handle those cases free of charge. Now, the Bar Association, we have filed many cases in court and for the benefit of the general public or some, but all those cases, I'm so happy, I'm so proud to say, being the president of the Bar Association, none of those senior lawyers have ever asked a single red cent. Sometimes even photocopying and everything is done out of their own pocket. And so we have this system, certainly that is also another positive that should be taken, but there may be exceptions, one or two, but by and large, certainly there are avenues, opportunities within the system of the Bar Association where we will certainly help and extend our hands to a person who needs our support.
Thank you very much, President's Counsel Kaushal Ranawratna, President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Dr. Jehan Pereira, the Executive Director of the National Peace Council. Dr. Pereira, you've spoken time and time again about the situation in Sri Lanka and where we can see ourselves, at least in the near future. You've dealt with Sri Lanka's political instability from the time of the war. Now we're in a relatively more peaceful era. However, strife is still high among the general public in Sri Lanka. What are your predictions for the near future?
Well, my thinking is this, that the downslide in our country began in 1972 with the 1972 Constitution. A government elected with a big majority, it was elected with a 2/3 majority on a socialist platform. Because that government saw that our society was unequal and that there were structures that prevented that inequality from being bridged. And so what they did was they gave to the parliament, the elected representatives of the people, supreme power. They elevated them above all other institutions. Parliament was elevated above all other institutions, including the judiciary and the public service, the civil service. I think that's where the rot started, because when power is given in unlimited quantities and is not checked and balanced, it is abused.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes, yes. So I think what we need to go to is to a law-governed society. I believe that our Supreme Court and our civil service have a big duty. They have to be courageous at this time. At this time, they have to, because this is a time of great crisis in the country. People are suffering. I mean, sometimes outsiders seem to think that our country is doing very well, but actually, if you go into the rural areas, if you go into Colombo, go in an Uber even and talk to the driver, they are having a very difficult time. So I think this is a time where our institutions, and as we have discussed here, we have also to be outspoken and courageous. And I believe that our public service, they do want to behave with integrity. They join the public service often with ideas of integrity. They join the judiciary with ideas of integrity. So I think those institutions need to be strengthened. And I'm happy that the Bar Association has played a great role during the Aragalaya, and he promises it will play a great role, and we will also ask you for assistance in the future. But what we need to become is a society, as the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission said, a society where there will be the rule of law and not the rule of men. That is, I think we are heading that, because people want change, the system change. That is the system change we need to get, and we need to find leaders. We have to elect the proper people, the proper people who will deliver on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council. Finally, I move my attention to Dr. Pakisawathi Saranamuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Pakisawathi Saranamuthu, since the time of the Aragalaya and even before that, on a number of occasions, we've been talking about change. Now, again, change is a very broad word, bringing a little bit more specificity into it. Change in the system is what we are looking at now. To change the system, the change needs to come from inside the system or from within the system. It's very hard or quite untenable to a certain degree to bring it from without, because that would involve maybe bloodshed, revolution, things that are not quite desirable. Now, you as a civil activist have been in this system for the longest time. You are currently challenging multiple pieces of legislation, multiple decisions taken by the executive from within the system. So as far as this change of the system that is anticipated by the greater public of Sri Lanka is concerned, do you think it is possible? Do you think it is on the horizon? Your time starts now.
Well, look at Sri Lanka today. The social contract in this country is in pieces. It's in absolute pieces. The institutions and processes of government, of law and order, of justice, and all of that do not function in the way that they are intended to. So that's what system change is about. It's not about making new laws. I mean, a couple of days ago, I saw in the newspapers that someone, the first person, was arrested.
Under the OSA.
Yes. Now, how on earth could that be?
I think that was corrected though by the
Yeah.
media spokesperson of the police.
Yes. So the media also has to become more literate and educated. You know. So if that was the case, that this person was arrested under which law we don't know, did we need a new law at all? We have perfectly decent laws if they are implemented in the way that they were intended to, and they ought to. But we have one law, the supreme law of the country, that badly needs to be abolished, got rid of, and a new law put in its place. We need a new constitution which provides for the architecture of the rule of law, for the inclusiveness of all the peoples of this country. That is what we need. So I hope that when we go to the next round of elections, that there will be a commitment to abolish the executive presidency, to strengthen the powers of parliament, to have a second chamber, to bring in post-enactment review of legislation, all of those things. Then we can start afresh and anew.
Thank you very
The problem, though, is not with the lack of commitment, it's with sustaining the commitment after elections.
No, so that is where all of us,
That's what we
all of us have to make sure that they do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakis, the Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Thank you very much, Dr. Jihan Pereira. Thank you very much, President's Counsel Kaushala Navaratna. And thank you very much, Professor Sampath Punchiheva. Thank you also to our journalists present today, Niresh Aliyathambi and Nadim Majid, for asking all the right questions. And thank you very much to you, our loyal viewers, for tuning in to another episode of Face the Nation. Of course, as was said at the beginning of the program, in a very few short months, you will be given an opportunity to vote. And how you exercise that vote, whether or not you make an informed decision, will determine the outcome of your future, the future of your children, and the future of generations to come here in this beautiful country that we call home. Thank you very much for tuning in. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.